Hi everyone, welcome back to another update on Kwyll. Quite a few interesting changes this week, mostly around the editor, but some exciting stuff. The major feature that's been introduced this week is something that I've had on my list to do for a little while. I'll go into details of what it is, but the reason it's come about now is because I did a quick poll of the supporters on the Discord channel, and this came up as one of two things that were popular to be implemented for their games that they're working on. So it gave me something to focus on. So we have this new feature. There's a few other bug fixes around and a few other bits and pieces, but it's mainly this one big feature that's taken up the time since the last video. So I'll go into that now. So if we switch over to the editor, what I'm going to try and do with this one is make it, I'm going to go through from a blank canvas and show you the feature in its incompleteness. So rather than starting with a pre-baked scene that I like I often do, I want to actually start from complete scratch. I feel this, firstly, it'll give a little bit more material to like tutorials for people to review and get an idea of the overall flow for creating something in Kwyll. Again, all of these are videos where I actually build something from nothing. It's probably quite helpful in that respect. So I want to do that as well as showing off the feature. So the feature is, maybe the best thing to do is actually start off explain a little bit about background about why the feature is required. So if I load up one of the other games that we've got, I think game 2 is a good one. If that's, yeah. So what we have here is this simple room here, and there's an object which is the bubble. And anyone who's seen this is one of the standard demos that I use a lot. But the bubble goes up and down, fairly simple stuff. Now to do that simple movement, I had to implement some logic on the bubble object. So the bubble object has logic, and part of what it does is moving the object. So this is basically doing some incrementing of the variable, comparing it to see if it's top or bottom, moving the object down here based on that outcome. So it's quite a complex tree. It's more complex than this than it really needs to be for all cases, and the reason for that is it exposes a couple of variables here, top and bottom, which allows it to be used in different rooms or in different use cases in the same room, and have a different top and bottom position for the animation. So if we go back to the rooms and have a quick look, in the second room I think there's one, and it's got a different position. In the third room again, it's got different top and bottom. So all you need to do is, when you're doing something like that, is open up the editing features, and you can see we've got these two variables exposed. So here it's 82 to 144. If we go back to this one and look at that object, its limits are different. So that's how you reuse an object and have these animations. But as I say, this is quite a lot of logic just to do a simple up and down animation. So one of the things that I've wanted to do for a while, it's been on the list of features, is to have a much simpler way of doing these basic fixed path animations, not necessarily just up and down, but animating between various points in a simple controlled way that doesn't require logic. It doesn't require coding up all of this logic, and still allows you to have different animations for the same object definition in different rooms or in different use cases. So that's what led to this feature. It basically allows you to animate an instance or a use of an object in a different way depending on where it is in the room, using a much more interactive mechanism than trying to code up movement. So the advantages are: A, it's simpler, and I'll show you how much simpler in a moment. B, it's more interactive. So in this case at the moment, there's no way of actually seeing what this animation looks like until you go to the preview. You can't see it here, you can't see it there, you can't see what the movement's doing, because the logic is only executed in the preview. So there's a number of reasons why it's better, and another reason is it's much more efficient at export time, because you're not exporting lots of functions and code to be compiled. You're just exporting the information that's required for the engine itself to move the object along the path, which will just be the path positions, or the positions, the keyframes, if you like. So if I reset and I'll go back, I'll just clear this up so that we're on a clean footing. So to do this, to demonstrate this feature, I'm going to need a sprite. So let's recreate our bubble, because that's an easy one to do. I'll draw the standard bubble because it's a fun thing to do. It's recognisable, and I've got it pretty much down, so I can do it without thinking too much about it now. I hope, and I think something like that is fine. We'll put a mask in. So that it draws cleanly. Shouldn't take a moment. So just in case anyone doesn't remember, the masking is a sprite method that allows you to hide certain parts of the background so that the sprite draws over the background rather than interfering it. So basically anything I'm drawing here will show the background through, anything else will show the paper colour where black is and the ink colour where white is, so it gives you a little more control. Now for this demo I'm going to need another sprite, but I want it to be a smaller one, a bullet or a projectile, so I'll create a new sprite sheet, and this one will be 8x8 because that's all we need, and we'll create a new sprite on that one and just add a simple bullet. That doesn't need a mask, so that's painting, just ordinary ink. And we won't be using masking for that. So now we need a couple of objects and create our bubble. This one we're going to be using the mask draw method, and we don't need any dynamic on it, so we'll add an animation with a single frame and we'll put our bubble in. We're not going to do any animation on this for sprite animation, just purely using the new animation system for location. We'll add another object for the bullet. This can be just load for now, or maybe let's switch it to XOR in fact, and we'll set it to 5 dynamic because we want to be able to create these ones dynamically. Now the bullet logic is going to be fairly simple. Let's start by just having an always trigger. So again, just to recap, an always trigger is executed every frame on the object while the object is alive, and all we're going to do is we're going to move the object. So we hook up the flow, the white arrows of the flow, and we need an X and a Y position, so we're going to move it. We'll get the current X position because we don't want it to move in X in this case, and we'll move that to there. And for the Y position, we just want it to move, for this part of the demo, we just want it to move up. So we'll add a math node, and we'll get the current Y position as the start, and we'll subtract 1, and that goes into the Y. That's all it needs to do, so it'll just move up. Now that's for moving. However, obviously we have only got 5 of these that we can play with, and if we want to find more, we need to remove things that are no longer valid. So we'll put in a quick in comparison. No, not in comparison. We'll put in is on screen. That's the best way. So hook up the flow again. This will check if the object is on screen. If it is, do nothing, carries on moving next frame. If it's not, then we want to kill it. So that should make, basically every frame it'll move it up until it goes off screen, and as soon as it goes off screen it removes it from the simulation, from the game. So that's the simple bullet. Now for the bubble, We'll leave the bubble for the moment. So let's go to our rooms. We're going to need to create a room. Okay, so that's our room. And now we want to drag a bubble object in. And we put it at... So now this is the new feature down here that you can see. This is our animation editor. There's nothing in there at the moment, but it allows us to add initially just one, but hopefully in the future more than one, keyframed animation. So you now, if you click on plus, it creates the animation for that object, and you can see you've now got this timeline, which is in frames. So if the game's running at full pace, it's 1 tick per 50th of a second. So we can now, we've got these modes over here. So all we can do at the moment is look around and change the current frame, which is the red marker. If everyone can see that. But we've got these other modes here, which allow you to play. Play is for scrubbing. I'll show you in a moment. But play is basically for scrubbing the animation, so you can preview the animation in the room. So getting back to what I said before, you couldn't, with the logic-based animation, you couldn't see what you were animating. With this system, you can. Then you've got the clapperboard, which is for recording keyframes, recording the information for the animation. And then you've got add and delete keyframes, which are disabled until you're in the edit mode. So if I move, excuse me, if I move the keyframe marker to frame 0 and then go into edit mode and then click on keyframe, you'll see it puts a keyframe in at frame 0. So now if we just zoom out a little so we have a bigger view of the time. If we move to maybe around about 100, so if we zoom back in on 100, make that our current frame. So now we're at the object's at, if I just have a quick look, 30 and 86. So we want to keep it at 86 but move it over to the other side of the screen. So if we move 86, let's move it to there. So now we can click create a keyframe there. So now if we zoom out on our timeline, we can see we've got two keyframes, one at 0 and one at 100. So if we go to play mode, we can scrub and see what that animation looks like when you play it. If you scrub beyond the first keyframe, it limits it to the keyframe value, and similarly at the other end, so it doesn't overrun. So that's just two simple keyframes, and just to see how this works, before we go any further, I'll move that room into the let me just position it at 0, 0 for completeness sake. So this is now moved into the map and will be our first room. So theoretically, if we go to preview and hit preview, we get our animation, and it just moves from there to there in 100 frames, 2 seconds, and goes back, and then it goes back again. So the frame marker just starts again, so it just cycles over and over again. And you can see this just changing the X value. So what does that mean? So a couple of other things we can do here. If I go to around about 200 and then drag over to our first keyframe and select it in edit mode, I can duplicate the keyframe. Now, what would if I let me introduce the right click menu first. Missed that piece. So if you right click on a keyframe, it will show you the position associated with that keyframe, some extra information here which I'm not going to go into at this point, but I will do in a moment, and this button for duplicating. So if you click duplicate, it will create a new keyframe with exactly the same information but at the current position. Now I've moved the current position back to 0 by mistake, so let's move back over to 200 there, and then without clicking with our left button, if I click only with the right button to bring this up and duplicate, now if I zoom out, you should see that I've got 3 keyframes, and this one, if I click on it, is exactly the same as the first one. So it's just basically creating a duplicate at that position. Now what that means is if we scrub this, it'll bounce. It will go from left to right and then back again. And similarly, if we go to the preview, it will go 2 seconds left to right and then 2 seconds right to left, and then repeat. So that's the majority of the features for that. We can delete, so if I select a keyframe when you're in edit mode, if I select a keyframe, I can delete the keyframe. Everything is undoable, so the keyframe can be restored. I can delete the entire animation if I don't want it anymore, and these two will be used for adding more animations. The system is designed to allow more than one animation on an object. Now it's important to note at this point that this animation is associated with this particular instance of the bubble in this room. So if I created another bubble, I could create a new animation on that and animate it completely differently. It doesn't affect the object definition over here. This object definition is not contained within that. It's contained only in the reference, in the object instance or use. And that gives you a bit more power in how you use it. You can use the animation to animate the same object in different ways for different use cases. So that's the majority of it. It's a very useful tool, and I've only done a very simple animation here, just moving it to the left and to the right, and then back again. But it is possible to do much more with that. You can have as many keyframes as you like in here, within reason. Obviously, the memory will limit your capacity, but there's no inherent limit on the number of keyframes, so you can create complete paths moving around for enemies and all sorts of different things. But the other thing that was requested while I was working on this from the testers in the Discord is how can we integrate this in some way with the logic. So I have got some plans, although not implemented at this point, to be able to play animation, stop animation, and so on. So at the moment, the animation if you've got an animation, it just plays from the start and continues as long as you're in that room. But there will be some nodes that will allow you to control that. But what they were referring to was actually more things like how can you do things based on where you are in the animation. So this is what led to this additional information here. So this is a trigger. So optionally, wherever you've got a keyframe in your timeline, you can enable a trigger, which basically means that when the animation hits that keyframe or that point in the animation, it will execute some logic code and pass in some information. So let's do it on this one here. So the flag is whether there is a trigger or not. So the first and the last will not have a trigger at the moment. And T is just a value. So it's any value between 0 and 127, which you can pass in, and I'll show you that in a moment. So now when the animation hits here, if there's a handler, a logic handler on the object for an animation event, it will run that code. So now we need to go back to the bubble logic, which we skipped before because it wasn't required. But now if we go, we've got this new new trigger type, which is animation event. Works very similarly to always in initialize. It'll execute the code that follows under certain conditions, and in this case the condition is that an animation event has been triggered by an animation on an instance of this object. The difference between this and the other trigger types is that it can actually have or provide additional information. So the underlying system will provide to any graph that flows off this trigger the values for the current frame number and the T value, which is this value here. And this allows you to do different things in this code, in this flow, depending on which keyframe has triggered the execution. So for now, we're going to ignore the T we're just going to try something out and just do a quick. This is where we needed the bullet object. So we're going to flow into the spawn. We're going to spawn a bullet, and we're going to position it at the X and Y of the bubble. So that's all it needs. So when this logic graph gets triggered by the animation hitting that keyframe, it should fire a bullet. Now this is let's see if this works. It didn't. Why didn't it? Let's go back to our room and have a look. Why didn't that work? Let me just have a quick look at, I remember what it was. If we look at the sprite and animation, I didn't actually add a visual to it, so it probably was working, but not in any way that you could see. So now that we hopefully have a, so that's why it wasn't showing there. So now if we go and have a look at this, hopefully, fingers crossed, there. It's firing. Yes, it was at the end one, so it fires when it reaches that end, and the bullet goes off until it dies. You'll notice I've also added dynamic objects to this list, which weren't there before. It was only local and global objects, so the dynamic objects will appear and disappear as their instantiator spawned and killed. So when it's killed, as it goes off screen, you can see it disappear, which was useful in debugging some problems with that. So we've got a simple animation that goes from left to right, and when it hits the right hand side of the screen, it fires a bullet going up. Now, what if we wanted it to do something slightly different? This is where the T value comes in. So that's the left hand keyframe there, and this is when it bounces back to the start. So if I put a trigger on that one and set that one to 2, for example, so now on both of these points, if we hit play, it will fire an event back to the logic system there with the value 1, and then when it reaches here, it will fire again with the value 2. So if we go back to our object and bubble logic, so now we're spawning, but we want to do something different based on the value that's coming in here, T, which is going to be 1 or 2. We still want to spawn a bullet, so we don't want that to change. But what we want to do is, in the bullet code, at the moment we're just always moving it up. So let's give our bullet the ability to go up or down. So we'll get the direction variable and we'll add it. So now if we set the direction variable to 1, it'll go up. If we set the direction variable to -1, it'll go down, or vice versa. But yeah, vice versa. So going back to our bubble logic, this is where we want to now set that variable. Now we're going to set it based on the value in T. So what we want to do is we need to a set variable on object, and it's going to be setting on the spawned object, which is of type bullet, and the value we want to set is direction. And then we want to duplicate that because we want one for also from there, direction bullet, and we want it to be -1 or 1. Now which one we do depends on the value of T. So we'll need a comparison. So let's get a math in comparison, and the value on the input is going to be T, and if it's 1, Then we want to go, let's say, down, and if it's not 1, which in our case will be 2, then we want it to go up. So this should do exactly the same thing as before. It should spawn the object. This information comes out of here. We need to make sure that the success, that's if the object is successfully spawned, goes through to the integer compare and sets the variable on the spawned object to either 1 or -1 depending on the value of the t coming in here from the keyframe. So if we go to preview now and cross our fingers, it should fire down on that one and up on that one, and you can see the -1 appearing there. So this gives quite powerful options for the animation. The animation can do all sorts of different things at different points in the animation. It can trigger color changes, sounds, interaction with other parts of the scene, all sorts of things. Anything you can do in Logic can be triggered at different points in the animation now. So this makes it very powerful. And just to show very quickly, I'm not going to export this because it takes too long, but if I switch over to the emulator, the emulator, Spectrum emulator, and just load one that I had before, you can see that this is all now exporting cleanly to the emulator as well. So the code on the Spectrum will run and do everything in the same way. It's a slightly different version of what I just showed you. So that all works. So I think that's it for this time round. That was the main thing. I wanted to show the animation system. As I say, I think it's quite powerful, and I'm interested to see what some of the testers are going to be doing with it to create interesting animations and complex logic and so on for their games. So, as always, if you like what you see, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you want to be kept informed of new updates, and comment, give any feedback in the comments or on the coffee page, and I'll see you all next time.